Why? What the fuck? Do not do this to me today. Do not do this to me. I have ascended. You cannot tell me that my connection is bad. My connection is so stable. I'm manifesting it. This is not... Mac, hello. Yes, it is acting up. It was telling me that my connection was down. It shouldn't be. It should be fine. Crimson. Okay, it seems to be fine. Questionable. So rude. I can't believe they've done this. Hello. Good, good. Oh, God. It's still yellow. I'm just kind of monitoring it. It doesn't... Questionable. Questionable. It's fine. New book tonight. Yep. My day was illuminating. I got about 4 hours of sleep. I woke up, couldn't fall back asleep at the ass crack of dawn. Not really. It was like 8 o'clock, but I don't even go to bed until after 4. So 4 hours of sleep, woke up, got into Enoch, did Enoch for like a few hours, and then changed, got into Shinzo, did all the cold brew stuff. So that is why I just went in the chat and was like, I'm neurotypical now. And everybody was like, what? I was like, yeah, I'm cured. This is the mudslide. Oh, what? It says my connection's down again. Fuck. I'm not sure if it's true. People are still responding, so... Nah, this is the Oogie Boogie mudslide, which already kind of tastes like an Irish coffee, and then I mixed it with Monster Irish Coffee instead of diluting it with water, which is, as you know, cold brew is a concentrate. You're supposed to dilute it with water, cream, sugar. I just diluted it with more coffee. And man... I'm not having heart palpitations, though, and I'm not going blind, so this should be fine. But it tastes delicious. This is packed with flavor. I understand. My internet is also horrible. It will probably dictate how long this live is going to last. It is really good, actually. And I haven't had any heart palpitations. I'll let you know if my chest feels funny later or I smell toast. But if I get through all the way through this live without smelling toast, I think we're good. I don't know. It seems like we'd be in the clear by then. I have ascended to a new plane of caffeination. It's over. It's over. It's delicious. So yeah, my day's been a whole thing. Got a lot of content done though. I have some Enoch content for you, which if you haven't read Peregrines yet, well, we're gonna start it tonight, and you'll know who Enoch is shortly. So, I think he doesn't come in for the first 2-3 chapters, but. Once we get there, I'll start posting Enoch drafts. I'm going in blind. Okay, that's fine. You can go in blind. I still haven't completely finished the series yet, but I've made it all the way to the last book, and I'm in the middle of the last book, and it's great. So, oof, it's good, man. I was really expecting myself to like go blind, but I don't know if I do have a high tolerance for caffeine. I can drink a pot in a day, like easily. And I've tried cutting back this year in particular, which makes it really difficult because you guys keep sending me amazing coffee. So thank you for all the coffee. And I do plan on doing reviews for all of them. I keep getting into Shinzo so I can make the coffee content, and then I get through some of it, but there's only so much coffee you can have a day, especially when I'm like making really nice ones. You know, it's time consuming just to make and then also to drink, and I don't want to make stuff just to waste it. That's terrible. I'm glad you're excited. I am loving it so far. So I can't wait to get started. Who is super ready to get started? Because I'm going to be honest, I tried timing myself, but it's different when you try and time slot yourself. Reading to yourself versus reading out loud. So I'm not sure how much we'll get through in about 2 hours, but we're going to try our damnedest. And we'll definitely get through chapter 1. I'm not so sure if we can finish chapter 2. Because in addition to not having the chapters clearly marked in a table of contents, they're also pretty long, but the margins are pretty thick. And the spacing is a little bit thicker because it is like a young adult novel. So we'll see how far we get. We're going to do our best. And I'll turn it around so you all can see the pretty pictures. Because there's a lot of really cool photography in this book. And I'll also post them on Discord when we're done. So you can take your time and go through them, and it'll be really cool. I meant to do that earlier today, but once again, I ascended into my cloud fortress and forgot some stuff. Forgive me for that, but all right. Should I read the back first, do you think? Should I? Or should I just dive in cold? Dive in cold. What do you guys think? Should I read the back? I can read the blurb if you want me to. But I was just going to dive right into the... I deep diving. All right. Prologue. I had just come to accept that my life would be ordinary when extraordinary things began to happen. The first of these came as a terrible shock, and, like anything that changes you forever, split my life into halves, before and after. Like many of the extraordinary things to come, it involved my grandfather, Abraham Portman. Growing up, Grandpa Portman was the most fascinating person I knew. He had lived in an orphanage, fought in wars, crossed oceans by steamship, in deserts on horseback, performed in circuses, knew everything about guns and self-defense and surviving in the wilderness, and spoke at least 3 languages that weren't English. It all seemed unfathomably exotic to a kid who'd never left Florida, and I begged him to regale me with stories whenever I saw him. He always obliged, telling them like secrets that could be entrusted only to me. When I was 6, I decided that my only chance of having a life as half as exciting as Grandpa Portman's was to become an explorer. He encouraged me by spending afternoons at my side, hunched over maps of the world, plotting imaginary expeditions with trails of red pushpins, and telling me about the fantastic places I would discover one day. At home, I made my ambitions known by parading around with a cardboard tube held to my eye, shouting, "Land ho!" and "Prepare a landing party," until my parents shooed me outside. I think They worried that my grandfather would infect me with some incurable dreaminess from which I'd never recover, that these fantasies were somehow inoculating me against more practical ambitions. So one day my mother sat me down and explained that I couldn't become an explorer because everything in the world had already been discovered. I'd been born in the wrong century, and I felt cheated. I felt even more cheated when I realized that most of Grandpa Portman's best stories couldn't possibly be true. The tallest tales were always about his childhood, like how he was born in Poland but at 12 had been shipped off to a children's home in Wales. When I would ask why he had to leave his parents, his answer was always the same: because the monsters were after him. Poland was simply rotten with them, he said. What kind of monsters? I'd ask, wide-eyed. It became a sort of routine. Awful, hunched-over ones with rotting skin and black eyes, he'd say. And they walked like this, and he'd shamble after me like an old-time movie monster until I ran away laughing. Every time he described them, he'd toss in some lurid new detail. They stank like putrefying trash. They were invisible except for their shadows. A pack of squirming tentacles lurked inside their mouths and could whip out in an instant and pull you into their powerful jaws. It wasn't long before I had trouble falling asleep, my hyperactive imagination transforming the hiss of tires on wet pavement into labored breathing just outside my window, or shadows under the door into twisting gray-black tentacles. I was scared of the monsters, but thrilled to imagine my grandfather battling them and surviving to tell the tale. More fantastic still were his stories about life in the Welsh children's home. It was an enchanted place, he said, designed to keep kids safe from the monsters, on an island where the sun shined every day and nobody ever got sick or died. Everyone lived together in a big house that was protected by a wise old bird. Or so the story went. As I got older, though, I began to have doubts. What kind of bird? I asked him one afternoon at age 7, eyeing him skeptically across the card table where he was letting me win at Monopoly. A big hawk who smoked a pipe, he said. You must think I'm pretty dumb, Grandpa. He thumbed through his dwindling stack of orange and blue money. I would never think that about you, Jacob. I knew I'd offended him because the Polish accent he could never quite shake had come out of hiding, so that would become would and think became think. Feeling guilty, I decided to give him the benefit of the doubt. But why did the monsters want to hurt you? I asked. Because we weren't like other people. We were peculiar. Peculiar how? Oh, all sorts of ways, he said. There was a girl who could fly, a boy who had bees living inside him, a brother and a sister who could lift boulders over their heads. It was hard to tell if he was being serious. Then again, my grandfather was not known as a teller of jokes. He frowned, reading the doubt on my face. Fine, you don't have to take my word for it, he said. I got pictures. He pushed back his lawn chair and went into the house, leaving me alone on the screened-in lanai. A minute later, he came back holding an old cigar box. I leaned in to look as he drew out 4 wrinkled and yellowing snapshots. The first was a blurry picture of what looked like a suit of clothes with no person in them. Either that or the person didn't have a head. Sure, he's got a head, my grandfather said, grinning. Only you can't see it. Why not? Is he invisible? Hey, look at the brain on this one. He raised his eyebrows as if I'd surprised him with my powers of deduction. Millard, his name was. Funny kid. Sometimes he'd say, Hey, Abe, I know what you did today, and he'd tell you where you'd been and what you had to eat, if you picked your nose when you thought nobody was looking. Sometimes he'd follow you, quiet as a mouse, with no clothes on so you couldn't see him, just watching. He shook his head. Of all of the things, eh? He slipped me another photo. Once I'd had a moment to look at it, he said, "So, what do you see?" "A little girl. And?" "She's wearing a crown?" He tapped the bottom of the picture. "What about her feet?" I held the snapshot closer. The girl's feet weren't touching the ground, but she wasn't jumping. She seemed to be floating in the air. My jaw fell open. "She's flying." "Close," my grandfather said. "She's levitating, only she couldn't control herself too well, so sometimes we'd have to tie a rope around her to keep her from floating away." My eyes were glued to her haunting, doll-like face. "Is it real?" "Of course it is," he said gruffly, taking the picture and replacing it with another. This one of a scrawny boy lifting a boulder. "Victor and his sister weren't so smart," he said, "but boy were they strong." "He doesn't look strong," I said, studying the boy's skinny arms. "Trust me, he was. I tried to arm wrestle him once and he just about tore my hand off." But the strangest photo was the last one. It was the back of somebody's head with a face painted on it. I stared at the last photo as Grandpa Portman explained. "He had two mouths, see? One in the front and one in the back. That's why he got so big and fat." "But it's fake," I said. "The face is just painted on." "Sure, the paint's fake. It was for a circus show, but I'm telling you, he had two mouths. You don't believe me?" I thought about it, looking at the pictures and then at my grandfather, his face so earnest and open. What reason would he have to lie? "I believe you," I said. And I really did believe him. For a few years, at least. Though mostly because I wanted to. Like other kids my age wanted to believe in Santa Claus, we cling to our fairy tales until the price for believing them becomes too high, which for me was the day in second grade when Robbie Jensen pantsed me at lunch in front of a table of girls and announced that I believed in fairies. It was just desserts, I suppose, for repeating my grandfather's stories at school, but in those humiliating seconds I foresaw the moniker Fairy Boy trailing me for years, and, rightly or not, I resented him for it. Grandpa Portman picked me up from school that afternoon, as he often did when both my parents were working. I climbed into the passenger seat of his old Pontiac and declared that I didn't believe in his fairy stories anymore. "What fairy stories?" he said, peering at me over his glasses. "You know, the stories about the kids and the monsters." He seemed confused. "Who said anything about fairies?" I told him that a made-up story and a fairy tale were the same thing, and that fairy tales were for pants-wetting babies, and that I knew his photos and stories were fakes. I expected him to get mad or put up a fight, but instead he just said, "Okay," and threw the Pontiac into drive. With a stab of his foot on the accelerator, we lurched away from the curb, and that was the end of it. I guess he'd seen it coming. I had to grow out of them eventually. but he dropped the whole thing so quickly it left me feeling like I'd been lied to. I couldn't understand why he'd made up all that stuff, tricked me into believing that extraordinary things were possible when they weren't. It wasn't until a few years later that my dad explained it to me. Grandpa had told him some of the same stories when he was a kid, and they weren't lies exactly, but exaggerated versions of the truth, because the story of Grandpa Portman's childhood wasn't a fairy tale at all. It was a horror story. My grandfather was the only member of his family to escape Poland before the Second World War broke out. He was 12 years old when his parents sent him into the arms of strangers, putting their youngest son on a train to Britain with nothing more than a suitcase and the clothes on his back. It was a one-way ticket. He never saw his mother or father again, or his older brothers, his cousins, his aunts and uncles. Each one would be dead before his 16th birthday, killed by the monsters he had so narrowly escaped. But these weren't the kind of monsters that had tentacles and rotting skin, the kind a 7-year-old might be able to wrap his mind around. They were monsters with human faces, in crisp uniforms, marching in lockstep. So banal you don't recognize them for what they are until it's too late. Like the monsters, the Enchanted Island story was also a truth in disguise. Compared to the horrors of mainland Europe, the children's home that had taken in my grandfather must have seemed like a paradise. And so in his stories, it had become one. A safe haven of endless summers and guardian angels and magical children who couldn't really fly or turn invisible or lift boulders, of course. The peculiarity for which they'd been hunted was simply their Jewishness. They were orphans of war, washed up on that little island in a tide of blood. What made them amazing wasn't that they had miraculous powers. That they had escaped the ghettos and gas chambers was miracle enough. I stopped asking my grandfather to tell me stories, and I think secretly he was relieved. An air of mystery closed around the details of his early life. I didn't pry. He had been through hell and had a right to his secrets. I felt ashamed for having been jealous of his life, considering the price he'd paid for it. And I tried to feel lucky for the safe and unextraordinary one that I had done nothing to deserve. Then, a few years later, when I was 15, an extraordinary and terrible thing happened. And there was only before and after. Chapter 1. I spent the last afternoon of Before constructing a 1 to 10,000 scale replica of the Empire State Building from boxes of adult diapers. It was a thing of beauty, really, spanning 5 feet at its base and towering above the cosmetics aisle, with jumbos for the foundation, lights for the observation deck, and meticulously stacked trial sizes for its iconic spire. It was almost perfect, minus one crucial detail. "You use Never Leak," Shelley said, eyeing my craftsmanship with a skeptical frown. "The sales on Stay Tight." Shelley was the store manager, and her slumped shoulders and dour expression were as much a part of her uniform as the blue polo shirts we all had to wear. "I thought you said Never Leak," I said, because she had. "Stay Tight," she insisted, shaking her head regretfully, as if my tower were a crippled racehorse and she the bearer of the pearl-handled pistol. There was a brief but awkward silence in which she continued to shake her head and shift her eyes from me to the tower and back to me again. I stared blankly at her, as if completely failing to grasp what she was passive-aggressively implying. "Oh," I said finally. "You mean you want me to do it over?" It's just that you use never leak, she repeated. No problem. I'll get started right away. With the toe of my regulation black sneaker, I nudged a single box from the tower's foundation. In an instant, the whole magnificent structure was cascading down around us, sending a tidal wave of diapers crashing across the floor, boxes caroming off the legs of startled customers, skidding as far as the automatic door, which slid open, letting in a rush of August heat. Shelley's face turned the color of ripe pomegranate. She should have fired me on the spot, but I knew I'd never be so lucky. I'd been trying to get fired from Smart Aid all summer, and it had proved next to impossible. I came in late, repeatedly, and with the flimsiest of excuses, made shockingly incorrect change, even misshelved things on purpose, stocking lotions amongst laxatives and birth control with baby shampoo. Rarely had I worked so hard at anything, and yet no matter how incompetent I pretended to be, Shelley stubbornly kept me on the payroll. Let me qualify my previous statement. It was next to impossible for me to get fired from Smart Aid. Any other employee would have been out the door a dozen minor infractions ago. It was my first lesson in politics. There are 3 Smart Aids in Inglewood, the small, somnolent beach town where I live. There are 27 in Sarasota County and 115 in all of Florida, spreading across the state like some untreatable rash. The reason I couldn't be fired was that my uncles owned every single one of them. The reason I couldn't quit was that working at Smart Aid as your first job had long been a hallowed family tradition. All my campaign of self-sabotage had earned me was an unwinnable feud with Shelley and the deep and abiding resentment of my coworkers who, let's face it, were going to resent me anyway, because no matter how many displays I knocked over or customers I shortchanged, one day I was going to inherit a sizable chunk of the company. And they were not. Wading through the diapers, Shelley poked her finger into my chest. That was my cat. Oops. I don't know if you heard that. Wading through the diapers, Shelley poked her finger into my chest and was about to say something dour when the PA system interrupted her. Jacob, you have a call on line 2. Jacob, line 2. She glared at me as I backed away, leaving her pomegranate face amid the ruins of my tower. The employee lounge was a dank, windowless room where I found the pharmacy assistant, Linda, nibbling a crustless sandwich in the vivid glow of the soda machine. She nodded at a phone screwed to the wall. Line 2's for you. Whoever it is sounds freaked. I picked up the dangling receiver. Jacob, is that you? Hi, Grandpa Portman. Jacob, thank God. I need my key. Where's my key? He sounded upset, out of breath. What key? Don't play games, he snapped. You know what key. You probably just misplaced it. Your father put you up to this, he said. Just tell me. He doesn't have to know. Nobody put me up to anything. I tried to change the subject. Did you take your pills this morning? They're coming for me, understand? I don't know how they found me after all these years, but they did. What am I supposed to fight them with, the goddamn butter knife? It wasn't the first time I'd heard him talk like this. My grandfather was getting old, and frankly, he was starting to lose it. The signs of his mental decline had been subtle at first, like forgetting to buy groceries or calling my mother by my aunt's name. But over the summer, his encroaching dementia had taken a cruel twist. The fantastic stories he'd invented about his life during the war, The monsters, the enchanted island, had become completely oppressively real to him. He'd been especially agitated the last few weeks, and my parents, who feared he was becoming a danger to himself, were seriously considering putting him in a home. For some reason, I was the only one who received these apocalyptic phone calls from him. As usual, I did my best to calm him down. "You're safe. Everything's fine. I'll bring over a video for us to watch later. How's that sound?" "No, stay where you are. It's not safe here." "Grandpa, the monsters aren't coming for you. You killed them all in the war, remember?" I turned to face the wall, trying to hide my end of this bizarre conversation from Linda, who shot me curious glances while pretending to read a fashion magazine. "Not all of them," he said. No. I killed a lot, sure, but there are always more." I could hear him banging around his house, opening drawers, slamming things. He was in full meltdown. "You stay away, hear me? I'll be fine. Cut out their tongues and stab them in the eyes. That's all you gotta do. If I could just find that goddamn key." The key in question opened a giant locker in Grandpa Portman's garage. Inside was a stockpile of guns and knives, sufficient to arm a small militia. He had spent half his life collecting them, traveling to out-of-state gun shows, going on long hunting trips, and dragging his reluctant family to rifle ranges on sunny Sundays. God, that's a tongue twister. So they could learn to shoot. He loved his guns so much that sometimes he even slept with them. My dad had an old snapshot to prove it. Grandpa Portman napping with a pistol in hand. When I asked my dad why Grandpa was so crazy about guns, he said it sometimes happened to people who used to be soldiers or who had experienced traumatic things. I guess that after everything my grandfather had been through, he never really felt safe anywhere, not even at home. The irony was, now that delusions and paranoia were starting to get the best of him, it was true. He wasn't safe at home, not with all those guns around. That's why my dad had swiped the key. I repeated the lie that I didn't know where it was. There was more swearing and banging as Grandpa Portman stomped around looking for it. "Faugh," he said finally. "Let your father have the key if it's so important to him. Let him have my dead body, too." I got off the phone as politely as I could and then called my dad. "Grandpa's flipping out," I told him. "Has he taken his pills today?" "He won't tell me. Doesn't sound like it, though." I heard my dad sigh. "Can you stop by and make sure he's okay? I can't get off work right now." My dad volunteered part-time at the bird rescue, where he helped rehabilitate snowy egrets hit by cars and pelicans that had swallowed fishhooks. He was an amateur ornithologist and a wannabe nature writer with a stack of unpublished manuscripts to prove it, which are real jobs only if you happen to be married to a woman whose family owns 115 drugstores. Of course, mine was not the realest of jobs either, and it was easy to ditch whenever I felt like it. I said I would go. "Thanks, Jake. I promise we'll get all this grandpa stuff sorted out soon, okay?" All this grandpa stuff. "You mean put him in a home?" I said. "Make him someone else's problem?" "Mom and I haven't decided yet." "Of course you have." "Jacob, I can handle him, Dad, really?" "Maybe now you can, but he's only going to get worse." "Fine, whatever." I hung up and called my friend Ricky for a ride. 10 minutes later, I heard him on the unmistakable throaty honk of his ancient Crown Victoria in the parking lot. On my way out, I broke the bad news to Shelley. Her tower of stay tight would have to wait until tomorrow. Family emergency, I explained. Right, she said. I emerged into the sticky hot evening to find Ricky smoking on the hood of his battered car. Something about his mud-encrusted boots and the way he let smoke curl from his lips and how the sinking sun lit his green hair reminded me of a punk redneck James Dean. He was all of those things, a bizarre cross-pollination of subcultures possible only in South Florida. He saw me and leapt off the hood. "You fired yet?" he shouted across the parking lot. "Shh," I hissed, running toward him. "They don't know my plan." Ricky punched my shoulder in a manner meant to be encouraging, but that nearly snapped my rotator cuff. "Don't worry, Special Ed. There's always tomorrow." He called me Special Ed because I was in a few gifted classes, which were, technically speaking, part of our school's special education curriculum, a subtlety of nomenclature that Ricky found endlessly amusing. That was our friendship, equal parts irritation and cooperation. The cooperation part was an unofficial brains for brawn trade agreement we worked out in which I helped him not fail English and he helped me not get killed by the roided-out sociopaths who prowled the halls of our school. That he made my parents deeply uncomfortable was merely a bonus. He was, I suppose, my best friend, which is a less pathetic way of saying he was my only friend. Ricky kicked the Crown Vic's passenger door, which was how you opened it, and I climbed in. The Vic was amazing, a museum-worthy piece of unintentional folk art. Ricky bought it from the town dump with a jar of quarters, or so he claimed, a pedigree whose odor even the forest of air freshener trees he'd hung from the mirror couldn't mask. The seats were armored with duct tape so that errant upholstery springs wouldn't find their way up your ass. Best of all was the exterior, a rusted moonscape of holes and dents, the result of a plan to earn extra gas money by allowing drunken partygoers to whack the car with a golf club for $1 a swing. The only rule, which had not been rigorously enforced, was that you couldn't aim at anything made of glass. The engine rattled to life in a cloud of blue smoke. As we left the parking lot and rolled past strip malls toward Grandpa Portman's house, I began to worry about what we might find when we got there. Worst-case scenarios included my grandfather running naked in the street, wielding a hunting rifle, foaming at the mouth on the front lawn, or lying in wait with a blunt object in hand. Anything was possible, and that this would be Ricky's first impression of a man I'd spoken about with reverence made me especially nervous. The sky was turning the color of a fresh bruise as we pulled into my grandfather's subdivision, a bewildering labyrinth of interlocking cul-de-sacs known collectively as Circle Village. We stopped at the guard gate to announce ourselves, but the old man in the booth was snoring and the gate was open, as was often the case, so we just drove in. My phone chirped with a text from my dad asking how things were going, and in the short time it took me to respond, Ricky managed to get us completely, stunningly lost. When I said I had no idea where we were, he cursed and pulled a succession of squealing U-turns, splitting arcs of tobacco juice from the window as I scanned the neighborhood for a familiar landmark. It wasn't easy, even though I'd been to visit my grandfather countless times growing up, because each house looked like the next. Squat and boxy with minor variations, trimmed with aluminum siding or dark 70s wood, or fronted by plaster colonnades that seemed almost delusionally aspirational. Street signs, half of which had turned a blank and blistered white from sun exposure, were little help. The only real landmarks were bizarre and colorful lawn ornaments, of which Circle Village was a veritable open-air museum. Finally, I recognized a mailbox held aloft by a metal butler that, despite its straight back and snooty expression, appeared to be crying tears of rust. I shouted at Ricky to turn left. The Vic's tires screeched, and I was flung against the passenger door. The impact must have jarred something loose in my brain, because suddenly the directions came rushing back to me. Right at the Flamingo Orgy, left at the multi-ethnic Roof Santas, straight past the Pissing Cherubs. When we passed the Cherubs, Ricky slowed to a crawl and peered doubtfully down my grandfather's block. There was not a single porch light on, not a TV glowing behind a window, not a town car and a carport. All the neighbors had fled north to escape the punishing summer heat, leaving yard gnomes to drown in lawns gone wild, and hurricane shutters shut tight so that each house looked like a little pastel bomb shelter. Last one on the left, I said. Ricky tapped the accelerator and we spluttered down the street. At the fourth or fifth house, we passed an old man watering his lawn. He was bald as an egg and stood in a bathrobe and slippers, spraying the ankle-high grass. The house was dark and shuttered like the rest. I turned to look, and he seemed to stare back, though he couldn't have. I realized with a small shock, because his eyes were a perfect milky white. That's strange, I thought. Grandpa Portman never mentioned that one of his neighbors was blind. The street ended at a wall of scrub pines, and Ricky hung a sharp left into my grandfather's driveway. He cut the engine, got out, and kicked my door open. Our shoes hushed through the dry grass to the porch. I rang the bell and waited. A dog barked to somewhere, a lonely sound in the muggy evening. When there was no answer, I banged on the door, thinking maybe the bell had stopped working. Ricky swatted at the gnats that had begun to clothe us. Maybe he stepped out, Ricky said, grinning. Hot date. Go ahead and laugh, I said. He's got a better shot than we do any night of the week. This place is crawling with eligible widows, I joked, only to calm my nerves. The quiet made me anxious. I fetched the extra key from its hiding place in the bushes. Wait here. Hell, I am. Why? Because you're 6'5" and have green hair, and my grandfather doesn't know you and owns a lot of guns. Ricky shrugged and stuck another wad of tobacco in his cheek. He went to stretch himself on a lawn chair as I unlocked the front door and stepped inside. Even in the fading light, I could tell the house was a disaster. It looked like it had been ransacked by thieves. Bookshelves and cabinets had been emptied, the knickknacks and large print Reader's Digest that had filled them thrown across the floor. Couch cushions and chairs were overturned. The fridge and freezer doors hung open, their contents melting into sticky puddles on the linoleum. My heart sank. Grandpa Portman had really, finally lost his mind. I called his name, but heard nothing. I went from room to room, turning on lights and looking anywhere a paranoid old man might hide from monsters. Behind furniture, in the attic crawl space, under the workbench, in the garage. I even looked behind his weapons cabinet, though, of course, it was locked. The handle ringed by scratches where he tried to pick it. Out on the lanai, the gallows of unwatered ferns swung browning in the breeze, while on my knees on the astroturf floor, I peered beneath rattan benches, afraid of what I might discover. I saw a gleam of light from the backyard. Running through the screen door, I found a flashlight abandoned in the grass. Its beam pointed at the woods that edged my grandfather's yard, a scrubby wilderness of sawtooth palmettos and trash palms that ran for a mile between Circle Village and the next subdivision, Century Woods. According to local legend, the woods were crawling with snakes, raccoons, and wild boars. When I pictured my grandfather out there, lost and raving in nothing but his bathrobe, a black feeling welled up in me. Every other week there was a news story about some geriatric citizen tripping into a retention pond and being devoured by alligators. The worst case scenario wasn't hard to imagine. I shouted for Ricky, and a moment later he came tearing around the side of the house. Right away he noticed something I hadn't, a long, mean-looking slice in the screen door. He let out a low whistle. "That's a hell of a cut. Wild pig couldn't have done it. Or a bobcat, maybe. You should see the claws on them things." A peal of savage barking broke out nearby. We both started, then traded a nervous glance. "Or a dog," I said. The sound triggered a chain reaction across the neighborhood, and soon barks were coming from every direction. "Could be," Ricky said, nodding. "I got a .22 in my trunk. You just wait." And he walked off to retrieve it. The barks faded, and a chorus of night insects rose up in their place, droning and alien. Sweat trickled down my face. It was dark now, but the breeze had died, and somehow the air seemed hotter than it had all day. I picked up the flashlight and stepped toward the trees. My grandfather was out there somewhere. I was sure of it. But where? I was no tracker, and neither was Ricky, and yet something seemed to guide me anyway. A quickening in the chest, a whisper in the vicious air, and suddenly I couldn't wait another second. I tromped into the underbrush like a bloodhound scenting an invisible trail. It's hard to run in a Florida woods where every square foot not occupied by trees is bristling with thigh-high palmetto spears and nets of entangling skunk vine, but I did my best, calling my grandfather's name and sweeping my flashlight everywhere. I caught a white glint out of the corner of my eye and made a beeline for it, but upon closer inspection, it turned out to just be a bleached and deflated soccer ball I'd lost years before. I was about to give up and go back for Ricky when I spied a narrow corridor of freshly stomped palmettos not far away. I stepped into it and shone my light around. The leaves were splattered with something dark. My throat went dry. Steeling myself, I began to follow the trail. The farther I went, the more my stomach knotted, as though my body knew what lay ahead and was trying to warn me. And then the trail of the flattened brush widened out, and I saw him. My grandfather lay face down in a bed of creeper, his legs sprawled out and one arm twisted beneath him as if he'd fallen from a great height. I thought surely he was dead. His undershirt was soaked with blood, his pants were torn, and one shoe was missing. For a long moment I just stared, the beam of my flashlight shivering across his body. When I could breathe again, I said his name, but he didn't move. I sank to my knees and pressed the flat of my hand against his back. The blood that soaked through was still warm. I could feel him breathing ever so shallowly. I slid my arms underneath him and rolled him onto his back. He was alive, though just barely, his eyes glassy, his face sunken and white. Then I saw the gashes across his midsection and nearly fainted. They were wide and deep and clotted with soil, and the ground where he'd lain was muddy from blood. I tried to pull the rags of his shirt over the wounds without looking at them. I heard Ricky shout from the backyard. "I'm here," he screamed, and maybe I should have said more, like danger or blood, but I couldn't form the words. All I could think was that grandfathers were supposed to die in beds, in hushed places, humming with machines, not in heaps, on the sodden, reeking ground with ants marching over them, a brass letter opener clutched in one trembling hand. A letter opener. That was all he'd had to defend himself. I slid it from his fingers, and he grasped helplessly at the air, so I took his hand and held it. My nail-bitten fingers twinned with his, pale and webbed with purple veins. "I have to move you," I told him, sliding one arm under his back and another under his legs. I began to lift, but he moaned and went rigid, so I stopped. I couldn't bear to hurt him. I couldn't leave him either, and there was nothing to do but wait. So I gently brushed loose soil from his arms and face and thinning white hair. That's when I noticed his lips moving. His voice was barely audible, something less than a whisper. I leaned down and put my ear to his lips. He was mumbling, fading in and out of lucidity, shifting between English and Polish. I don't understand, I whispered. I repeated his name until his eyes seemed to focus on me, and then he drew a sharp breath and said quietly but clearly, "Go to the island, Jacob. Here it's not safe." It was the old paranoia. I squeezed his hand and assured him we were fine. He was going to be fine. That was twice in one day that I'd lied to him. I asked him what happened, what animal had hurt him, but he wasn't listening. "Go to the island," he repeated. "You'll be safe there. Promise me." "I will. I promise." What else could I say? "I thought I could protect you," he said. "I should have told you a long time ago." I could see the life going out of him. "Told me what?" I said, choking back tears. "There's no time," he whispered. Then he raised his head off the ground, trembling with the effort, and breathed into my ear. "Find the bird in the loop on the other side of the old man's grave. September 3rd, 1940. I nodded, but he could see that I didn't understand. With his last bit of strength, he added, "Emerson, the letter. Tell them what happened, Jacob." And with that, he sank back, spent and fading. I told him I loved him, and then he seemed to disappear into himself, his gaze drifting past me to the sky, bristling now with stars. A moment later, Ricky crashed out of the underbrush. He saw the old man limp in my arms and fell back a step. "Oh, man! Oh, Jesus! Oh, Jesus!" he said, rubbing his face with his hands. And as he babbled about finding a pulse and calling the cops and "Did you see anything in the woods?" the strangest feeling came over me. I let go of my grandfather's body and stood up, every nerve ending tingling with an instinct I didn't know I had. There was something in the woods, all right. I could feel it. There was no moon and no movement in the underbrush but our own, and yet somehow I knew just when to raise my flashlight and just where to aim it. And for an instant, in that narrow cut of light, I saw a face that seemed to have been transplanted directly from the nightmares of my childhood. It stared back with eyes that swam in dark liquid, furrowed trenches of carbon black flesh loose on its hunched frame, its mouth hinged open grotesquely so that a mass of long eel-like tongues could wriggle out. I shouted something, and then it twisted and was gone, shaking the brush and drawing Ricky's attention. He raised his .22 and fired. Pat, 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 saying, "What was that? What the hell was that?" But he hadn't seen it, and I couldn't speak to tell him. Frozen in place as I was, my dying flashlight flickered over the blank woods. And then I must have blacked out, because he was saying, "Jacob, Jake, hey, Ed, are you okay or what?" And that's the last thing I remember. That's the end of chapter 1, so we're going to take a break for a second while I drink some water. Thank you for the paw prints. Thank you. I appreciate it. Thank you for the paw prints. I have had a blast reading through this, so I'm really excited to go through it all with you guys. First chapter, murder. But yeah, no, it's real rough. For people who don't know, There's a lot about like World War II and stuff that happens, especially in the beginning of the series. So if that's like a hardcore trigger for you, or if kind of gore is not your thing, I forgot to mention that at the top of this. I may have just bought the box set. Oh, thank you. I appreciate the compliment. I also like my cosplay. Oh yeah, right from the top, first chapter, bam. No. Okay, good. I should have mentioned that as a trigger before I started this. I didn't think about it. I'm so sorry. I'll be sure to mention if there are any more like kind of aggressively grotesque bits in the future. Thank you. Tell Toby I say hi, Swiftblood. It's corgi time, people. I'm gonna take a sip of this cold brew really quick. It's pretty thick, so like I got water for the live to make reading easier. I don't want to like throw my voice out. You do? Okay, hold on. I'm gonna screenshot. I always forget to. Now I got your username so I can look it up later. I like looking at everybody's cosplay, so whenever someone mentions their cosplayer, I always like to keep track so I can go look it up later. No, I do not. The Wolf in the Tower Unwoven? No. But I'm gonna definitely look it up later. It's coffee with hot chocolate time. Awesome. Oh, fun times. I hope you have a fun time when you go. Do you know what cosplay you're gonna do, or do you think, or are you still flexible on that? It's on YouTube for free. Okay, I'll have to look that up. Hold on. I'm gonna go back and screenshot that too, so that I remember to do it. Nobody comment in the next 5 seconds. Thank you. I'll start screenshotting stuff I want to keep up to date on. All right, Riptide. It was good having you here. Hope to see you next week. Sorry, I gotta be able to look up everybody's cosplay later. Because it's so hard, because then the live ends, and then I'm like, I'm gonna remember their username, and then after the live ends, I'm like, what was their username? And then I lose people, and I get so frustrated. Cosplaying as Shigaraki right now, we stand a good Shigaraki in this house. Good to know, good to know. I believe I got... Oh, no, what? No, I don't want to end the live. Why did it tell me to... You just made your own overhaul jacket? That's work. That's work. That jacket's fly. Oh, that sounds fun. There's also like a lot more room for creativity and like exploring different techniques and stuff like that with an OC. So that's always something that's really cool to kind of venture on. You had me at queer art. Yeah. Green mocha? Mocha? What do you mean green mocha? Hello, newcomer. Virgil Stormcloud. Nice. There's a lot of new names in here. I don't know if it's because Peregrines or like what. If I just haven't seen people in a while. Hi. Hi, Fox. Good to see you here. Yeah, I was like, there's a lot of new names. I'm seeing a lot of new names. Yeah, that's what I was thinking. At first, I read it as matcha, and I was like, no, yeah, matcha normally. Wait, no, that doesn't say matcha. That says mocha. So, lots of new people in here. All the new people are shouting out. Yeah, there's some people who've come back too, because I recognize some usernames from people who haven't been here in a hot minute. Good, good strategy. I normally also like to try and stay on the cosplay side. Either that or the cat video side. That's my strategy too, so. Yeah, I see you semi-regularly, Mac. Like, you act like you're almost never here. You're here every once in a while. And that, you know what? That's okay. That's what the YouTube is for. If you can't make it, I know schedules are tight. People got lives and shit to do. And, that's why it's there, for your leisure. Oh, yeah, that's also true. I did it because we're starting a new book, like, I don't. Anyway. I was on your For You page. How did I get on the For You page? I'm never on the For You page. So confused. Mocha coffee creamer into cocoa weeds. Oh, that does sound genius. Well, you don't have to go unless you want to. You got marker on yourself. Yeah, we do. I can't believe I was on the For You page. I'm absolutely astounded. Well, but that was ages ago. No, or was that today? There's no way I was on the For You page today. What? Okay, to be real, I have not checked my video at all today. I've been too busy cranking out content to monitor what my video's actually been doing. So, maybe it did really well and I didn't notice. I I was busy making content. I made a bunch of Enoch content, Enoch O'Connor. So we'll have that, and then I made a bunch of Shinzo coffee content. So crazy. Oh, that's pretty high for me never using those tags before. It'll go down. Guarantee it. Any tips for cosplay? I don't know if I'm the person you want to be asking for tips. Be patient with yourself. It's really easy to see all these really cool cosplayers doing crazy shit all the time, and for you to kind of start comparing yourself, and that turns something that's a really fun hobby and a really fun thing to do to feel at home in a community, and make it into like a keeping up with the Joneses sort of game. And I've watched some cosplayers I know like fall into that rut and then kind of suck all the fun out of it. I know that's probably not the tip you were looking for, but try to find the enjoyment in the progress, and you'll have a lot more fun of a time, and it'll probably keep you innovative and doing it for a lot longer than some other people who try and push themselves so hard and then lose steam because they lose confidence in themselves because they don't have the money, time, or know-how how to do CapCut or stuff like that. All that comes with time. Just take your time and have fun. And when you see something cool, instead of feeling self-conscious about your own cosplay, have the patience and learn how to do it. If you see something cool someone made on CapCut and you're like, I can never do that, stop that in its tracks and go learn how to do all that fun shit you see. And don't sweat it if it takes a while to learn. Don't sweat it if you can't post every day or get your views up. That's not really the point. We all got into it because we loved a community. And as long as you're having fun, that's what's really important. Anyway, probably not what you were looking for, but... Exactly, Swiftblood. That's the energy we want to be bringing into this. See, like, not everybody can. And I think it's weird to, like, gatekeep people that can't afford, like, the canon cosplay, or, like, you know, that's not canon. Or, like, I'm in Shinzo and I'm wearing a band t-shirt, which I think you'd probably like the Proto Men. It's a pretty good band. If you've never heard of the Proto Men, you should go look them up because they're really cool. Anyway, whatever, it doesn't matter. But have fun with it. It's supposed to be fun. Do what you want. I love this band. Anyway. Thank you. I don't normally give pep talks, and when I do, I'm normally not very great at them. So that means a lot. I also am not a very smart spender. I blow some of my money on the weirdest shit. So I got a coffee grinder that looked like it should be in a steampunk novel the other day. Do not. Canon. I'll post pictures of it at some point. I know I posted it in Voice Chat Chaos when I ordered it, but I'll go back and get you some pictures of it because it's a crazy coffee grinder. Love it. Love it. Don't regret it. Good purchase. I will repost it in the Discord because it's been a hot minute. Cosplay is just fan art that you wear. It's fun. Everybody's having fun. Okay. I was like, it looks like if Johannes had a coffee grinder. This is what it looks like. I might do some Johannes coffee content now that I have that coffee grinder. That'd be so funny. We love a good closet cosplay in this business. Yes, yes. That's bringing good vibes. I even have like the I guess some of the canon stuff, and even then sometimes I just wear something I feel like he would wear. Like if the shoe fits, you know, I'm like, I want to be comfortable. I don't want to put on my hero uniform. Yes, Leonie cosplay. It is so hard. I have a cosplay that I'm really sinking money into that doesn't even have a canon appearance. And I'm like, we're going to get a green suit. Hear me out. And I'm like, you can't go spend. And part of me is just like, am I doing it for the suit? Maybe. Am I going to use it for Lloyd Forger? Yes. Am I gonna get the cosplay version? No. I'm gonna get a legit green suit. It's gonna be fly as hell. And I'm like, why do you do this? Why do you have to make everything real? But yeah, I'll spend my money on the most bogus aspect of a cosplay. It'll be like, I could get the entire cosplay off of, you know, whatever site for like $40. And then I'm like, or, hear me out, we could get the real thing for $200. We could get a really fly version of so insane. Why did I get a whole suit for a cosplay? No one will ever know. Yeah, like, I'm always like, I can justify it to myself if I wear it to this thing. Ooh, do it. There's be. I'm not even entirely satisfied with this wig for Shinzo, and I plan on getting another one eventually. But by God, if you just like go on Amazon and look up, like try and find just a purple wig, why do 98% of them look like trash unless it's like the long purple wig? Like, I don't know what it is. It's like they cannot make these to save their lives. And this one is so shiny. Do you know how much baby powder I put in this thing to take down the shine? Like a whole bunch. Didn't even matter. Didn't even matter. Still shiny. Still terrible. So have fun finding a wig. I'll say that. But definitely also just have fun cosplaying. It's a fun time. Loki-inspired Greek dress for the lols. That's the best reason to do it. That's the Loki reason to do it. Canon. So terrible. I considered it, and then I was like, I am going to waste so much of my life doing that. I do not have the capacity to do that right now. And then I never did. Yeah, I've gotten some really nice cosplay wigs, and then I found some on the cheaper side, depending on what my finances are like, and what I want to do with a cosplay. But are you allergic to makeup in general, or are you allergic to certain ingredients in makeup? Because if you could isolate what's in that makeup, or whatever makeup you're having a reaction to, it might not be prevalent in like every single kind of foundation. And you can find, there's so many new makeup companies now, especially like indie brands on like TikTok and stuff that are really doing some really cool shit, that I guarantee you could find a more ethically sourced brand than whatever the fuck they're selling at Ulta these days. And you could probably find something that works for you if you could isolate that ingredient. Or you could go like a different route. Paint, face paint. There's different companies that sell face paint or stuff that is better for the skin. And maybe find that. No, there isn't. You could do cosplay with no makeup. You might, and there's a lot to be said for like lighting and stuff like that. Like if you, like filming in natural light, I'm never awake for it. Almost 98% of the time, I'm not awake for it. But filming in natural light can really help anyway. You don't need makeup to dictate what your cosplay is. You've wanted to read Peregrine since 2013. Let's get back to it. Yeah, we've had a decently sized intermission. Who's ready to go for chapter 2? Everybody get your pets, get your drinks, take a bathroom break, get back. You can take me to the bathroom with you. I won't know unless you announce it. Don't announce it. All right. Chapter 2. I spent the months following my grandfather's death cycling through a purgatory of beige waiting rooms and anonymous offices, analyzed and interviewed, talked about just out of earshot, nodding when spoken to, repeating myself, the object of 1,000 pitying glances and knitted brows. My parents treated me like a breakable heirloom, afraid to fight or fret in front of me lest I shatter. I was plagued by wake-up screaming nightmares so bad that I had to wear a mouth guard to keep from grinding my teeth into nubs as I slept. I couldn't close my eyes without seeing it, that tentacle-mouthed horror in the woods. I was convinced it had killed my grandfather and that it would soon return for me. Sometimes a sick, panicky feeling would flood over me like it did that night, and I'd be sure that nearby, lurking in a strand of dark trees, beyond the next car in a parking lot, behind the garage where I kept my bike, it was waiting. My solution was to stop leaving the house. For weeks I refused even to venture into the driveway to collect the morning paper. I slept in a tangle of blankets on the laundry room floor, the only part of the house with no windows and also a door that locked from the inside. That's where I spent the day of my grandfather's funeral, sitting on the dryer with my laptop, trying to lose myself in online games. I blamed myself for what happened. If only I'd believed him, was my endless refrain, but I hadn't believed him, and neither had anyone else, and now I knew how he must have felt, because no one believed me either. My version of events sounded perfectly rational until I was forced to say the words aloud, and then it sounded insane, particularly on the day I had to say them to the police officer who came to our house. I told him everything that had happened, even about the creature, as he sat nodding across the kitchen table, writing nothing in a spiral notebook. When I finished, all he said was, "Great, thanks," and then turned to my parents and asked if I'd been to see anyone. As if I wouldn't know what that meant. I told him I had another statement to make and then held up my middle finger and walked out. My parents yelled at me for the first time in weeks. It was kind of a relief, actually, that old sweet sound. I yelled some ugly things back, that they were glad Grandpa Portman was dead, that I was the only one who'd really loved him. The cop and my parents talked in the driveway for a while, and then the cop drove off only to come back an hour later with a man who introduced himself as a sketch artist. He'd brought a big drawing pad and asked me to describe the creature again, and as I did, he sketched it, stopping occasionally to ask for clarifications. "How many eyes did it have?" "2. "Gotcha," he said, as if monsters were a perfectly normal thing for a police sketch artist to be drawing. As an attempt to placate me, it was pretty transparent. The biggest giveaway was when he tried to give me the finished sketch. "Don't you need this for your files or something?" I asked him. He exchanged raised eyebrows with the cop. "Of course, what was I thinking?" It was totally insulting. Even my best and only friend Ricky didn't believe me, and he'd been there. He swore up and down that he hadn't seen any creature in the woods that night, even though I'd shined my flashlight right at it, which is just what he told the cops. He'd heard barking, though. We both had. So it wasn't a huge surprise when the police concluded that a pack of feral dogs had killed my grandfather. Apparently, they'd been spotted elsewhere and had taken bites out of a woman who'd been walking in Century Woods the week before. All at night, mind you. "Which is exactly when the creatures are harder to see," I said, but Ricky just shook his head and muttered something about me needing a brain shrinker. "You mean head shrinker," I replied, "and thanks a lot. It's great to have such supportive friends." We were sitting on my roof deck watching the sun set over the Gulf, Ricky coiled like a spring in an unreasonably expensive Adirondack chair my parents had bought back from a trip to Amish country, his legs folded beneath him and arms crossed tight, chain-smoking cigarettes with a kind of grim determination. He always seemed vaguely uncomfortable at my house, but I could tell by the way his eyes slid off me whenever he looked in my direction that now it wasn't my parents' wealth that was making him uneasy, but me. "Whatever, I'm just being straight with you," he said. "Keep talking about monsters and they're going to put you away. Then you really will be special ed. Don't call me that." He flicked away his cigarette and spat a huge glistening wad over the railing. "Were you just smoking and chewing tobacco at the same time? What are you, my mom? Do I look like a truck stop hooker?" Ricky was a connoisseur of your mom jokes, but this was apparently more than he could take. He sprang out of the chair and shoved me so hard I almost fell off the roof. I yelled at him to get out, but he was already going. It was months before I'd see him again. So much for having friends. Eventually, my parents did take me to a brain shrinker, a quiet, olive-skinned man named Dr. Golan. I didn't put up a fight. I knew I needed help. I thought I'd be a tough case, but Dr. Golan made surprisingly quick work of me. The calm, effectless way he explained things was almost hypnotizing, and within 2 sessions, he'd convinced me that the creature had been nothing more than the product of my overheated imagination, that the trauma of my grandfather's death had made me see something that wasn't really there. It was Grandpa Portman's stories that had been planted the creature in my mind to begin with, Dr. Golan explained, so it only made sense that, kneeling there with his body in my arms and reeling from the worst shock of my young life, I had conjured up my grandfather's own boogeyman. There was even a name for it, acute stress reaction. "I don't see anything cute about it," my mother said when she heard my shiny new diagnosis. Her joke didn't bother me, though. Almost anything sounded better than crazy. Just because I no longer believed the monsters were real didn't mean I was better, though. I still suffered from nightmares. I was twitchy and paranoid. Bad enough at interacting with other people that my parents hired a tutor so that I only had to go to school on days I felt up to it. They also, finally, let me quit Smart Aid. Feeling better became my new job. Pretty soon I was determined to be fired from this one too. Once the small matter of my temporary madness had been cleared up, Dr. Golan's function seemed mainly to consist of writing prescriptions. Still having nightmares? I've got something for that. Panic attack on the school bus? This should do the trick. Can't sleep? Let's up the dosage. All those pills were making me fat and stupid, and I was still miserable, getting only 3 or 4 hours of sleep a night. That's why I started lying to Dr. Golan. I pretended to be fine when anyone who looked at me could see the bags under my eyes and the way I jumped like a nervous cat at sudden noises. One week I faked an entire dream journal, making my dreams sound bland and simple, the way a normal person should be. One dream was about going to the dentist, and another I was flying. 2 nights in a row I told him I dreamed I was naked in school. Then he stopped me. "What about the creatures?" I shrugged. "No sign of them. Guess that means I'm getting better, huh?" Dr. Golan tapped his pen for a moment and then wrote something down. "I hope you're not just telling me what you think I want to hear." "Of course not," I said, my gaze skirting the framed degrees on his wall, all attesting to his expertness in various subdisciplines of psychology, including, I'm sure, how to tell when an acutely stressed teenager is lying to you. "Let's be real for a minute." He set down his pen. "You're telling me you didn't have the dream even one night this week?" I'd always been a terrible liar. Rather than humiliate myself, I copped to it. "Well," I muttered, "maybe one." The truth was that I'd had the dream every night that week, with minor variations. It always went like this. I'm crouched in the corner of my grandfather's bedroom, amber dusklight retreating from the windows, pointing a pink plastic BB rifle at the door. An enormous glowing vending machine looms where the bed should be, filled not with candy, but rows of razor-sharp tactical knives and armor-piercing pistols. My grandfather's there in an old British Army uniform, feeding the machine dollar bills. But it takes a lot to buy a gun, and we're running out of time. Finally, a .45 spins toward the glass, but before it falls, it gets stuck. He swears in Yiddish, kicks the machine, then kneels down and reaches inside to try and grab it, but his arm gets caught. That's when they come, their long black tongues slithering up the windows looking for a way in. I point the BB gun at them and pull the trigger, but nothing happens. Meanwhile, Grandpa Portman is shouting like a crazy person. "Find the bird, find the loop, Jakob Vi, don't you understand, you goddamn stupid Yahtzee!" And then the windows shatter, and glass rains in, and the black tongues are all over us, and that's generally when I wake up in the middle of a puddle of sweat, my heart doing hurdles in my stomach, tied in knots. Even though the dream was always the same and we'd been over it 100 times, Dr. Golan still made me describe it in every session. It's like he was cross-examining my subconscious, looking for some clue he might have missed the 99th time around. "And in the dream, what's your grandfather saying?" "The same stuff as always," I said, "about the bird and the loop and the grave." "His last words?" I nodded. Dr. Golan tented his fingers and pressed them to his chin, the very picture of a thoughtful brain shrinker. "Any new ideas about what they might mean?" "Yeah, Jack and shit." "Come on, you don't mean that." I wanted to act like I didn't care about his last words, but I did. They'd been eating away at me almost as much as the nightmares. I felt like I owed it to my grandfather not to dismiss the last thing he said to anyone in the world as delusional nonsense, and Dr. Golan was convinced that understanding them might help purge my awful dreams. So I tried. Some of what Grandpa Portman had said made sense, like the thing about wanting me to go to the island. He was worried that the monsters would come after me and thought the island was the only place I could escape them, like he had as a kid. After that, he'd said, "I should have told you." But because there was no time to tell me whatever it was he should have told me, I wondered if he hadn't done the next best thing and left a trail of breadcrumbs leading to someone who could tell me, someone who knew his secret. I figured that's what all the cryptic-sounding stuff about the loop and the grave and the letter was. For a while, I thought the loop could be a street in Circle Village, a neighborhood that was nothing but looping cul-de-sacs, and that Emerson might be a person my grandfather had sent letters to, an old war buddy he'd kept in touch with or something. Maybe this Emerson lived in Circle Village, in one of its loops, by a graveyard, and one of the letters he'd kept was dated September 3rd, 1940. And that was the one I needed to read. I knew it sounded crazy, but crazier things have turned out to be true. So, after hitting dead ends online, I went to Circle Village Community Center, where the old folks gather to play shuffleboard and discuss their most recent surgeries, to ask where the graveyard was and whether anyone knew an Emerson. They looked at me like I had a second head growing out of my neck, baffled that a teenage person was speaking to them. There was no graveyard in Circle Village, and no one in their neighborhood named Emerson, and no street called Loop Drive or Loop Avenue or Loop anything. It was a complete bust. Still, Dr. Golan wouldn't let me quit. He suggested I look into Ralph Waldo Emerson, a supposedly famous old poet. "Emerson wrote his fair share of letters," he said. "Maybe that's what your grandfather was referring to." It seemed like a shot in the dark, but just to get Golan off my back, one afternoon I had my dad drop me off at the library, so I could check it out. I quickly discovered that Ralph Waldo Emerson had indeed written lots of letters that had been published. For about 3 minutes, I got really excited, like I was close to a breakthrough, and then two things became apparent. First, that Ralph Waldo Emerson had lived and died in the 1800s, and therefore could not have written any letters dated September 3rd, 1940, and second, that his writing was so dense and arcane that it could possibly have held the slightest interest for my grandfather, who wasn't exactly an avid reader. I discovered Emerson's soporific qualities the hard way by falling asleep with my face in the book, drooling over an essay called Self-Reliance, and having the vending machine dream for the 6th time that week. I woke up screaming and was unceremoniously ejected from the library, cursing Dr. Golan and his stupid theories all the while. The last straw came a few days later, when my family decided it was time to sell Grandpa Portman's house. Before prospective buyers could be allowed inside, though, the place had to be cleaned out. On the advice of Dr. Golan, who thought it would be good for me to confront the scene of my trauma, I was enlisted to help my dad and Aunt Susie sort through the detritus. For a while after we got to the house, my dad kept taking me aside to make sure I was okay. Surprisingly, I seemed to be, despite the scraps of police tape clinging to the shrubs and the torn screen on the lanai flapping in the breeze. These things, like the rented dumpster that stood on the curb, waiting to swallow what remained of my grandfather's life, made me sad, not scared. Once it became clear I wasn't about to suffer a mouth-frothing freakout, we got down to business. Armed with garbage bags, we proceeded grimly through the house, emptying shelves and cabinets and crawl spaces, discovering geometries of dust beneath objects unmoved for years. We built pyramids of things that could be saved or salvaged, and pyramids of things destined for the dumpster. My aunt and father were not sentimental people, and the dumpster pile was always the largest. I lobbied hard to keep certain things, like the 8-foot stack of water-damaged National Geographic magazines teetering in a corner of the garage. How many afternoons had I spent poring over them, imagining myself among the mudmen of New Guinea, or discovering a cliff-top castle in the kingdom of Bhutan? But I was always overruled. Neither was I allowed to keep my grandfather's collection of vintage bowling shirts. "They're embarrassing," my dad claimed, his big band and swing 78s. "Someone will pay good money for those." Or the contents of his massive, still-locked weapons cabinet. "You're kidding, right? I hope you're kidding." I told my dad he was being heartless. My aunt fled the scene, leaving us alone in the study where we'd been sorting through a mountain of old financial records. "I'm just being practical. This is what happens when people die, Jacob." "Yeah? How about when you die? Should I burn all your old manuscripts?" He flushed. I shouldn't have said it. Mentioning his half-finished book projects was definitely below the belt. Instead of yelling at me, though, he was quiet. "I brought you along today because I thought you were mature enough to handle it. I guess I was wrong." "You are wrong. You think getting rid of all Grandpa's stuff will make me forget him? But it won't." He threw up his hands. "You know what? I'm sick of fighting about it. Keep whatever you want." He tossed a sheaf of yellowed papers at my feet. "Here's an itemized schedule of deductions from the year Kennedy was assassinated. Go have it framed." I kicked away the papers and walked out, slamming the door behind me, and then waited in the living room for him to come out and apologize. When I heard the shredder roar to life, I knew he wasn't going to, so I stomped across the house and locked myself in the bedroom. It smelled of stale air and shoe leather and my grandfather's slightly sour cologne. I leaned against the wall, my eyes following a trail worn into the carpet between the door and the bed, where a rectangle of muted sun caught the edge of a box that poked out from beneath the bedspread. I went over and knelt down and pulled it out. It was the old cigar box, enveloped in dust, as if he'd left it there just for me to find. Inside were the photos I knew so well. The invisible boy, the levitating girl, the boulder lifter, the man with a face painted on the back of his head. They were brittle and peeling, smaller than I remembered, too, and looking at them now, as an almost adult, it struck me how blatant the fakery was. A little burning and dodging was probably all it took to make the invisible boy's head disappear. The giant rock being hoisted by that suspiciously scrawny kid could have easily been made out of plaster or foam, but these observations were too subtle for a 6-year-old, especially one who wanted to believe. Beneath those photos were 5 more that Grandpa Portman had never shown me. I wondered why, until I looked closer. 3 were so obviously manipulated that even a kid would have seen through them. One was a laughable double exposure of a girl trapped in a bottle. Another showed a levitating child suspended by something hidden in the dark doorway behind her. The third was a dog with a boy's face pasted crudely onto it. As if these weren't bizarre enough, the last 2 were like something out of David Lynch's nightmares. One was an unhappy young contortionist doing a frightened backbend, and the other a pair of freakish twins were dressed in the weirdest costumes I'd ever seen. Even my grandfather, who'd filled my head with stories of tentacle-tongued monsters, had realized images like these would give any kid bad dreams. Possibly what you would consider some disturbing photographs if you don't like contortionists. Kneeling there on my grandfather's dusty floor with those photos in my hands, I remembered how betrayed I'd felt the day I realized his stories weren't true. Now the truth seemed obvious. His last words had been just another sleight of hand, and his last act was to infect me with nightmares and paranoid delusions that would take years of therapy and metabolism-wrecking medications to rout out. I closed the box and brought it into the living room where my dad and Aunt Susie were emptying a drawer full of coupons, clipped but never used, into a 10-gallon trash bag. I offered up the box. They didn't ask what was inside. So that's it, Dr. Golan said. His death was meaningless? I'd been lying on the couch watching a fish tank in the corner, its one golden prisoner swimming in lazy circles. Unless you've got a better idea, I said. Some big theory about what it all means that you haven't told me. Otherwise... What? Otherwise, this is just a waste of time. He sighed and pinched the bridge of his nose as if trying to dispel a headache. What your grandfather's last words meant isn't my conclusion to draw, he said. It's what you think that matters. That is such psychobabble bullshit, I spat. It's not what I think that matters, it's what's true. But I guess we'll never know, so who cares? Just dope me up and collect the bill. I wanted him to get mad, to argue, to insist I was wrong, but instead he sat poker face, drumming the arm of his chair with his pen. It sounds like you're giving up, he said after a moment. I'm disappointed. You don't strike me as a quitter. And you don't know me very well, I replied. I could not have been less in the mood for a party. I'd known I was in for one the moment my parents began dropping unsubtle hints about how boring and uneventful the upcoming weekend was sure to be, when we all knew perfectly well I was turning 16. I'd begged them to skip the party this year because, among other reasons, I couldn't think of a single person I wanted to invite. But they worried that I spent too much time alone, clinging to the notion that socializing was therapeutic. So was electroshock, I reminded them, but my mother was loath to pass up even the flimsiest excuse for a celebration. She once invited friends over for our cockatiel's birthday, in part because she loved to show off her house. Wine in hand, she'd herd guests from room to over-furnished room, extolling the genius of the architect and telling war stories about the construction. It took months to get these sconces from Italy. We'd just come home from my disastrous session with Dr. Golan. I was following my dad into our suspiciously dark living room as he muttered things like, "What a shame we didn't plan anything for your birthday," and, "Oh well, there's always next year," when all the lights flooded on to reveal streamers, balloons, and a motley assortment of aunts, uncles, cousins I rarely spoke to, anyone my mother could cajole into attending, and Ricky, whom I was surprised to see lingering near the punch bowl, looking comically out of place in a studded leather jacket. Once everyone had finished cheering and I'd finished pretending to be surprised, my mom slipped her arm around me and whispered, "Is this okay?" I was upset and tired and just wanted to play Warspire 3, The Summoning, before going to bed with the TV on. But what were we going to do, send everyone home? I said it was fine, and she smiled as if to thank me. "Who wants to see the new edition?" she sang out, pouring herself some Chardonnay before marching a troop of relatives up the stairs. Ricky and I nodded to each other across the room, wordlessly agreeing to tolerate the other's presence for an hour or two. We hadn't spoken since the day he nearly shoved me off the roof, but we both understood the importance of maintaining the illusion of having friends. I was about to go talk to him when my Uncle Bobby grabbed me by the elbow and pulled me into a corner. Bobby was a big barrel-chested guy who drove a big car and lived in a big house and would eventually succumb to a big heart attack from all the foie gras and monster thick burgers he'd packed into his colon over the years, leaving everything to my pothead cousins and his tiny, quiet wife. He and my Uncle Les were co-presidents of Smart Aid, and they were always doing this, pulling people into corners for conspiratorial chats as if plotting a mob hit rather than complimenting the hostess on her guacamole. "So, your mom tells me you're really turning the corner with, on this whole grandpa thing." My thing. No one knew what to call it. "Acute stress reaction," I said. "What?" "That's what I have, whatever." "That's good, real good to hear." He waved his hand as if putting all that unpleasantness behind us. "So your mom and I were thinking, how'd you like to come up to Tampa this summer? See how the family business works. Crack heads with me at HQ for a while? Unless you love stocking shelves." He laughed so loudly that I took an involuntary step backward. "You can even stay at the house, do a little tarpon fishing with me and your cousins on the weekends." He then spent 5 long minutes describing his new yacht, going into elaborate, almost pornographic detail, as if that alone were enough to close the deal. When he finished, he grinned and stuck out his hand for me to shake. "So, what do you think, J-Dog?" I guess it was designed to be an offer I couldn't refuse, but I'd have rather spent the summer in a Siberian labor camp than live with my uncle and his spoiled kids. As for working at Smart 8 HQ, I knew it was a probably inevitable part of my future, but I'd been counting on at least a few more summers of freedom and 4 years of college before I had to lock myself in a corporate cage. I hesitated, trying to think of a graceful way out. Instead, what I said was, "I'm not sure my psychiatrist would think it's such a great idea right now." His bushy eyebrows came together. Nodding vaguely, he said, "Oh, well, sure, of course. We'll just play it by ear then, pal. How's that sound?" And then he walked off without waiting for an answer, pretending to see someone across the room whose elbow he needed to grab. My mother announced that it was time to open presents. She always insisted I do this in front of everyone, which was a problem, because as I may have mentioned already, I'm not a good liar. That also means I'm not good at feigning gratitude for re-gifted CDs of country Christmas music or subscriptions to Field and Stream. For years, Uncle Les had labored under the baffling delusion that I am outdoorsy. But for decorum's sake, I forced a smile and held up each unwrapped trinket for all to admire until the pile of presents on my coffee table had shrunk to just 3. I reached for the smallest one first. Inside was the key to my parents' 4-year-old luxury sedan. They were getting a new one, my mom explained, so I was inheriting the old one. My first car. Everyone oohed and awed, but I felt my face go hot. It was too much like showing off to accept such a lavish present in front of Ricky, whose car cost less than my monthly allowance at age 12. It seemed like my parents were always trying to get me to care about money, but I didn't really. Then again, it's easy to say you don't care about money when you have plenty of it. The next present was the digital camera I had begged my parents for all last summer. "Wow," I said, testing its weight in my hand. "This is awesome." "I'm outlining a new bird book," my dad said. "I was thinking maybe you could take the pictures." "A new book," my mom explained. "That's a phenomenal idea, Frank. Speaking of which, whatever happened to the last book you were working on?" Clearly, she'd had a few glasses of wine. "I'm still ironing out a few things," my dad replied quietly. "Oh, I see." I could hear Uncle Bobby snickering. "Okay," I said loudly, reaching for the last present. "This one's from Aunt Susie." "Actually," my aunt said as I began tearing away the wrapping paper, "it's from your grandfather." I stopped mid-tear. The room went dead quiet, people looking at Aunt Susie as if she'd invoked the name of some evil spirit. My dad's jaw tensed, and my mom shot back the last of her wine. "Just open it, and you'll see," Aunt Susie said. I ripped away the rest of the wrapping paper to find an old hardback book, dog-eared and missing its dust jacket. It was The Selected Works of Ralph Waldo Emerson. I stared at it as if trying to read through the cover, unable to comprehend how it had come to occupy my now trembling hands. No one but Dr. Golan knew about the last words, and he promised on several occasions that unless I threatened to guzzle Drano or do a backflip off the Sunshine Skyway Bridge, everything we talked about in his office would be held in confidence. I looked at my aunt, a question on my face that I didn't quite know how to ask. She managed a weak smile and said, "I found it in your grandfather's desk when we were cleaning out the house. He wrote your name in the front. I think he meant for you to have it." God bless Aunt Susie. She had a heart after all. Neat. I didn't know your grandfather was a reader, my mom said, trying to lighten the mood. That was thoughtful. Yes, said my dad through clenched teeth. Thank you, Susan. I opened the book. Sure enough, the title page bore an inscription in my grandfather's shaky handwriting. The selected works of Ralph Waldo Emerson, edited and with an introduction by Clifton Durrell, Ph.D., to Jacob Magellan Portman and the worlds he has yet to discover. I got up to leave, afraid I might start crying in front of everyone, and something slipped out from between the pages and fell to the floor. I bent to pick it up. It was a letter. Emerson. The letter. I felt the blood drain from my face. My mother leaned towards me and in a tense whisper asked if I needed a drink of water, which was mom speak for keep it together, people are staring. I said, I feel a little, and then with one hand over my stomach, I bolted to my room. The letter was handwritten on fine, unlined paper in looping script so ornate it was almost calligraphy, the black ink varying in tone like that of an old fountain pen. It read, Dearest Abe, I hope this note finds you safe and in the best of health. It's been such a long time since we last received word from you, but I write not to admonish, only to let you know that we still think of you often and pray for your well-being. Our brave, handsome Abe. As for life on the island, little has changed, but quiet and orderly is the way we prefer things. I wonder if we would recognize you after so many years, though I'm certain you'd recognize us. Those few who remain, that is. It would mean a great deal to have a recent picture of you, if you've one to send. I've included a positively ancient snap of myself. E misses you terribly. Won't you write to her? With respect and admonition, Headmistress Alma LeFay Peregrine. As promised, the writer had enclosed an old snapshot. I held it under the glow of my desk lamp, trying to read some detail in the woman's silhouetted face, but there was none to find. The image was so strange, and yet it was nothing like my grandfather's pictures. There were no tricks here. It was just a woman smoking a pipe. It looked like Sherlock Holmes's pipe, curved and drooping from her lips. My eyes kept coming back to it. Was this what my grandfather had meant for me to find? Yes, I thought, it has to be. Not the letters of Emerson, but a letter tucked inside Emerson's book. But who was this headmistress, this Peregrine woman? I studied the envelope for a return address, but found only a fading postmark that read Cairnholm Island, Cymru, UK. UK, that was Britain. I knew from studying atlases as a kid that Cymru meant Wales. Cairnholm had to be the island Miss Peregrine had mentioned in her letter. Could it have been the same island where my grandfather lived as a boy? 9 months ago, he told me to find the bird. 9 years ago, he had sworn that the children's home where he lived was protected by a bird who smoked a pipe. At age 7, I'd taken this statement literally, but the headmistress in the picture was smoking a pipe, and her name was Peregrine, a kind of hawk. What if the bird my grandfather wanted me to find was actually the woman who'd rescued him, the headmistress of the children's home? Maybe she was still on the island after all these years, old as dirt but sustained by a few of her wards, children who'd grown up but never left. For the first time, my grandfather's last words began to make a strange kind of sense. He wanted me to go to the island and find this woman, his old headmistress. If anyone knew the secrets of his childhood, it would be her. But the envelope's postmark was 15 years old. Was it possible she was still alive? I did some quick calculations in my head. If she'd been running a children's home in 1939 and was, say, 25 at the time, then she'd be in her late 90s today. So it was possible. There were people older than that in Englewood who still lived by themselves and drove, and even if Miss Peregrine had passed away in the time since she'd sent the letter, there might still be people on Cairnholm who could help me. People who had known Grandpa Portman as a kid. People who knew his secrets. We, she had written. Those few who remain. As you can imagine, convincing my parents to let me spend part of my summer on a tiny island off the coast of Wales was no easy task. They, particularly my mother, had many compelling reasons why this was a wretched idea, including the cost, the fact that I was supposed to spend the summer with Uncle Bobby learning how to run a drug empire, and that I had no one to accompany me. Since neither of my parents had any interest in going, and I certainly couldn't go alone. I had no effective rebuttals, and my reason for wanting to make the trip, I think I'm supposed to, wasn't something I could explain without sounding even crazier than they already feared I was. I certainly wasn't going to tell my parents about Grandpa Portman's last words, or the letter, or the photo. They would have had me committed. The only sane-sounding arguments I could come up with were things like, I want to learn more about our family history, and the never-persuasive, Chad Kramer and Josh Bell are going to Europe this summer. Why can't I? I brought these up as frequently as possible without seeming desperate, even once resorting to, it's not like you don't have the money, a tactic I instantly regretted. But it looked like it wasn't going to happen. Then, several things happened that helped my case enormously. First, Uncle Bobby got cold feet about my spending the summer with him, because who wants a nutcase living in their house? So my schedule was suddenly wide open. Next, my dad learned that Cairnholm Island is a super important bird habitat, and like half the world's population of some bird that gives him a total ornithology boner lives there. He started talking a lot about his hypothetical new bird book. And whenever the subject came up, I did my best to encourage him and sound interested. But the most important factor was Dr. Golan. After a surprisingly minimal amount of coaxing by me, he shocked us all by not only signing off on the idea, but also encouraging my parents to let me go. JL. Yeah, okay, sorry. It could be important for him, he told my mother after a session one afternoon. It's a place that's been so mythologized by his grandfather that visiting could only serve to demystify it. He'll see that it's just as normal and unmagical a place as any place else, and by extension, his grandfather's fantasies will lose their power. It could be a highly effective way of combating fantasy with reality. But I thought he already didn't believe that stuff, my mother said, turning to me. Do you, Jake? I don't, I assured her. Not consciously he doesn't, Dr. Golan said, but it's his unconsciousness that's causing him problems right now. The dreams, the anxiety. And you really think going there could help, my mother said, narrowing her eyes at him as if readying herself to hear the unvarnished truth. When it came to things I should or should not be doing, Dr. Golan's word was law. I do, he replied. And that was all it took. After that, things fell into place with astonishing speed. Plane tickets were bought, schedules scheduled, plans laid. My dad and I would go for 3 weeks in June. I wondered if that was too long, but he claimed he needed at least that much time to make a thorough study of the island's bird colonies. I thought Mom would object. 3 whole weeks? But the closer our trip got, the more excited for us she seemed. My 2 men, she would say, beaming, off on a big adventure. I found her enthusiasm kind of touching, actually, until the afternoon I overheard her talking on the phone to a friend, venting about how relieved she'd be to have her life back for 3 weeks and not have 2 needy children to worry about. I love you too, I wanted to say, with as much hurtful sarcasm as I could muster, but she hadn't seen me, and I kept quiet. I did love her, of course, but mostly just because loving your mom is mandatory, not because she was someone I think I'd like very much if I met her walking down the street, which she wouldn't be anyway. Walking is for poor people. During the 3-week window between the end of the school and the start of our trip, I did my best to verify that Miss Alma LaFay Peregrine still resided among the living, but internet searches turned up nothing. Assuming she was still alive, I had hoped to get her on the phone and at least warn her that I was coming, but I soon discovered that almost no one on Cairnholm even had a phone. I found only one number for the entire island, so that's the one I dialed. It took nearly a minute to connect, the line hissing and clicking, going quiet, then hissing again, so that I could finally feel every mile of the vast distance my call was spanning. Finally, I heard that strange European ring, and a man, whom I could only assume was profoundly intoxicated, answered the phone. "Pisshole!" he bellowed. There was an unholy amount of noise in the background, the kind of dull roar you'd expect at the height of a raging frat party. I tried to identify myself, but I don't think he could hear me. "Pisshole!" he bellowed again. "Who's this now?" But before I could say anything, he'd pulled the receiver away from his head to shout at someone. "I said shut up, you dozy bastards, I'm on the..." And then the line went dead. I sat with the receiver to my ear for a long, puzzled moment, then hung up. I didn't bother calling back. If Cairnholm's only phone connected to some den of iniquity called the Piss Hole, how did that bode for the rest of the island? Would my first trip to Europe be spent evading drunken maniacs and watching birds evacuate their bowels on rocky beaches? Maybe so. But if it meant that I'd finally be able to put my grandfather's mystery to rest and get on with my unextraordinary life, anything I had to endure would be worth it. And that's the end of chapter 2. We're only slightly over, like 11 minutes. That was pretty solid. I was wondering how well it would time out. You don't trust the doctor? I make it a habit to never trust any therapist. Glad you're enjoying it so far. It will really start to pick up there around the mid-range. So, like, it's going to get weird right at the end of the next session is when it's going to be real funky. I believe. Also, I think I have to rap next time, and I don't want to do that. So, it's like the worst rap ever, too. I don't know what I'm going to do. And I refuse to do like a hardcore accent. I just feel like I'm just going to offend everyone in the world if I do accents. Bring Nodi over to rap. I keep Nodi here specifically to do the rap. Oh, we get Nodi on the line. Nodi will hate me if I do that. Bribe Nodi with corgis. Well, I hope you heard it all. There will be a recording eventually up on the YouTube. The YouTube is in a link tree on, or it's not on the link tree, I don't think, but it is on my TikTok profile. You can hit the little YouTube button. It'll take you to the YouTube. I'm going to try and get the recording up for the first 2 chapters here in the next few days. So, and everything else that I've done is also on there. We've also read Johannes Cabal. If you're at all interested in really sarcastic necromancers, that's up there too. I'm eventually also going to get copies of the live up on the YouTube. I have to catch up on some things, but you know how it is. You get busy. Life is happening. All right. I know we're a little bit over time. Is Insomniac still here? We have to make very sure that Insomniac did not leave. Yes. Okay. We gotta do cat facts. For anybody who's still in here, who's new, I really like cats, and we do cat facts. So, we're going to do cat facts before Insomniac has to go to bed, because I know Insomniac also loves cats, and we got to do it before they have to go to bed. So, because they have a crazy work schedule. And today, we're doing the European wildcat. Always try and remain as accommodating as possible of everyone's schedule. The European wildcat is a shaggy brown-gray cat that's found across Europe from Scotland to the south of Spain and all the way east to Caucasus. I always fuck that up. Local populations in different places have totally different diets and can even look fairly different, depending on how much the group has interbred with local feral and domestic cats. This is one of the major threats to the rare European wildcat, in fact. The species is protected, but misunderstandings have led to falling numbers. Intermingling with local domestic cats has reduced the population of European wildcats, and because they look so similar to domestic cats to begin with, some are mistaken for feral cats and hunted as a nuisance. They've been hunted to extinction in England, although they're still found in Scotland. European wildcats grow longer coats in the winter and shed them for summer, a trait which some domestic cat breeds share. Examples of European wildcats have been found on islands in the Mediterranean Sea, but experts believe these were brought over, not endemic. The cartoon character, Sylvester the cat, was named for the Latin name for the European wildcat, Felis sylvestris, which means cat of the forest. And there's a little picture. Look at his little raccoon tail. Sorry, so cute. All right, and that concludes the reading period of time for the evening. For anybody who's new and it's like, cat facts? What the fuck? I make a lot of content with my cat, and my cat is adorable, and everybody loves my cat. I think, pretty sure, 98% sure everybody loves my cat. I love my cat. I love all cats, and I encourage people to send me cat videos. And so a large portion of this platform is just cats. So I always make sure, and I was gifted this giant cat book. So we're slowly working our way through it and reading the entire cat book. So that's what cat facts are about, and you're updated. Oh, you know I do. They're all here. They're all here. All the cats. All the time. Who loves the cats? It's me. It's me. These are the ones that are within arm reach at the point in time. Oh, yeah. I just can't reach all of them. Some of them are in the far corner. Oh, I think I can reach Bartholomew. No, I can't. He's all the way over there. I can reach Katsawa, though. He's chilling with Evie. Katsawa. Oh, they're all good boys, huh? I want to reach him. Oh my god. Okay. I'm not even sure if I could fit all of them in frame. This is a challenge. Adorable. Okay. There's a lot of cats. I don't even think I could get Dr. Boston in here without... I can't even reach him. He's the furthest one because he's so big. Oh. That's okay. I hope you have a decent day at school tomorrow. Don't die. Do your best. Well, don't die. I can't emphasize that enough. High school's a drag, but you can do it. I believe in you. Katsawa also believes in you. All of the cats. Yeah. Good night. Oh. Oh my goodness. That's so hot. I'm sorry. Oh my god. And we're gonna wrap it up here soon anyway, because we got board games to play and dads to come over and shit to do. You know how it is. You're probably gonna join us. If you're not new here, we have a secret Discord. That's sort of not a secret. There's a link for it. We just don't normally talk about it. But since it's the premiere, I'm gonna tell you now, and this is the only time I'm gonna advertise it. There's a Discord. You have to do an introduction. Don't forget that. Literally, seriously, it's kind of important. We need to know who's lurking. We don't care if you lurk. We just gotta know. Anyway, and we go on a Discord call and play a board game and get really lit. We have a smoothie sometimes. Sometimes we get a little lit and then we play a board game and then everybody watches and listens to us go off on weird tangents. And my dad comes over. And if that's not your thing, don't worry. It doesn't have to be. It's super weird. But we're going to do that. Crimson's already started and is ahead of us. We're behind by like 21 minutes almost exactly. And you know what? This was a new enterprise. I didn't know exactly how long and how much material I was going to get through. So, Secret Tunnel has been a reoccurring theme in everything. Everybody go get a smoothie. Report back to the Discord. And we're going to play a game. Oh, I can't help you with that. If you want an actual smoothie, you have to go to a professional. Anyway, but I will see you all next week on Tuesday at 8 Central, and we're going to dive into chapters 3 and 4 and have a fun time doing it, hopefully. So I will see you all again next week.